Thanks, Melissa. So quick show of hands, how many Windows admins do we have in here? Just only do Windows. Perfect. What about Windows admins that also manage Linux systems?
How many admins do we have that only do Linux? You're probably in the wrong session.
So, hi everybody, my name is Chris Kittell. I'm a systems engineer with Walmart. I've got 15 years in experience with managing Windows on both client and server platforms. A lot of stuff with provisioning, deployment, as well as systems management.
And I'm Derek Robinson. I've been with Walmart for 8 years, and I started out in operations on Windows servers, and for the last 3 years, I've been working with Chris on an overall automation strategy for our Windows servers.
Yep, so a little bit about us. 11,500 stores under 72 different banners, 28 different countries. We have e-commerce sites in 11 countries and growing. We not only have variety in our stores and in our websites, but also there's tons of variety within our infrastructure. So for Windows, we're talking about 40,000 servers that are spread across our data centers, our distribution centers, our stores, and even in the cloud. And really, our primary challenges kind of involve really knowing or not knowing how these things are set up, what really matters from a configuration management standpoint. You know, we have snowflakes. We have a lot of snowflakes. Snowflakes that were set up and configured a certain way for some particular reason. And a lot of this stuff kind of gets passed on with tribal knowledge, which eventually we get lost, right?
Yeah. So how many people have accidentally broke something because you ran the wrong version of the script? I know I have. And that was a common problem for us. We had scripts scattered everywhere. File shares on different admins' computers, and even through emails. If you would log on to a script file share, you would sometimes find 20 different versions of that script. 80 user 1, 80 user 2, 80 user 3. And so this caused a lot of extra time spent just trying to figure out, well, where is that script? Do I even need that script? Does it work anymore? And so we were spending a lot of time just reinventing the wheel over and over, and we weren't talking between the teams. There's a lot of silos. And a lot of this was due to our point-and-click culture.
Hi, my name is Chris. I'm a recovering Windows user, GUI user.
Yeah. Hi, Chris. Yeah. And so, that gets me every time. So GUIs and install wizards aren't necessarily bad. They're great for snowflakes. They're great for those one-offs or just a quick fix. However, once you start redoing those things over and over, and you start having multiple people do those things over and over, then you get drift coming in or just plain user error. Because you'll go through and the first 3 times, you type in the thing right. The 3rd time, you might forget a period and put in a comma, and then who knows what you've done by the 20th install. So we needed something that could automate this. And the first thing we went to was gold images. And these worked great for a while. However, we had some of the same issues and some new issues pop up. One of the issues we had was gold images. And if you're not familiar with that term, that's a special server that you create. And this is my server that I'm going to use for the standard of everything. So whenever I want a new server, I copy, paste it, paste it. However, you have people go in, and they'll change something, and they create a new version. They may not document what they did. So 10 versions in, you no longer know how is that system any different. And with Windows, trying to do a difference between one registry and the other is very painful. And so we also had another issue of you'd go into a file share, and now you have gold image 1, gold image 2, and gold image 3.
So yeah, with all these challenges and all these restrictions, we kind of looked internally and looked at ourselves and said, man, in order to make a difference, we've got to change our processes. We got to change our tooling. We got to change our culture. So really, for us, that meant, you know, we knew what we wanted. We wanted better reporting. We needed better insight into what our infrastructure looked like. So
yeah. So one of the first things we did was decide, how do we want to start? And this was 3 to 4 years ago. And at this time, cloud was just starting to come into our environment. and we were wanting to do Windows 2012. It was a new operating system for our area. And so we decided, since we have this new paradigm of cloud where things are different, and we have 2012, this new thing that we can just experiment on, let's try something completely different. Let's not do anything like we did before. And so we looked around, and at that time, the Windows toolset wasn't exactly where we wanted it. And PowerShell had came out with desired state configuration. So we decided that we were going to build upon that. And so we created our own wrapper around PowerShell DSC. And we called it, to avoid confusion, Walmart DSC. This was, in hindsight, a bad decision because it didn't work at all, and now Chris doesn't allow me to name anything. So we wanted the DSC engine because we thought it was a good tool set, and we wanted to be able to capitalize on the resources provided by Microsoft, the PowerShell community, and our sysadmins who know how to write PowerShell. And so we wrote a ASP.NET API to a database to hold all our configurations, and a bunch of PowerShell scripts to do all the magic. And with this, we emulated a lot of Puppet because that's what our Linux team was using, and so we wanted to share that same workflow for our end users. So it worked great. We had up to 2,000 servers in this, and then it all fell apart. So once we hit a certain scale, we realized it is really hard to write enterprise scale software. We had lots of bugs, lots of documentation that wasn't written because we were too busy fixing bugs. And then we weren't able to onboard users because there was no documentation. And so along with this, we started to run into scaling issues because the things that we had done and decisions we made in the beginning were going to break whenever PowerShell 5 was released. And then once we started hitting 2,000 nodes, the way we had written it was very single-threaded. PowerShell didn't have a lot of the easy run space stuff it does now. So we were like, we can either rewrite this, or we can look around and see, has anything changed? And so the world had changed. At this time, when we looked around, Puppet had released a 64-bit agent, and the awesome community had released a DSC module to help you manage DSC with Puppet. And so we talked to our Linux guys, and they were also looking to use Puppet Enterprise.
Yep. And we looked at what the Linux guys were doing, and we're like, man, they were doing some really cool stuff, so we really wanted to be a part of that. Teaming up with them had several advantages, namely, Windows admins can use the same workflow to deploy the same types of changes to our infrastructure. It kind of fostered growth within our community, right? Sharing amongst the different teams, so it kind of was a good promotion for these tools.
Yeah.
Okay. So how many people out there also use these tools in your environment to manage things one way or another? It's a pretty good amount. Yeah, I know there's a lot of complexity in different environments, and so our strategy has really been to look at what tools there are and leverage those tools for the strengths they have in certain scenarios, certain use cases. Take, for example, SCCM. It's a virtual Swiss Army knife. It tries to do everything for managing servers, desktops, even mobile devices. Sure, it's got a ton of functionality, but sometimes those little scissors just don't cut it, right? So for us, the sweet spot is in client management. On the server side, we use it for image management, OS deployment, patch management. Those are the sweet things for it. Also with alternate providers, software delivery is pretty good for us in helping us protect the WAN. And some sites that may have really limited bandwidth, it does a pretty good job with getting software to it. Active Directory, that's our industrial power washer. There's a ton of settings, a ton of different nozzles. It's got a lot of power. The thing is, if you're blowing settings out with that, there's not much feedback. The nodes don't come back and say, hey, I got it, I'm good. So it's kind of a spray and pray type tool. One recently I'd asked my son to, power wash the back deck, okay? When I got home, I took a look at it, and man, it was really clean, but it was also really splintered. So, I still love the kid, it's fine. But not the settings I would have used, not really the outcome I was looking for. That said, another thing would be if you have many different domains, then you're managing separate policies across all of those domains, and that can kind of turn into, some maintenance issues down the road. That said, there are use cases for it in our environment. We have RDS servers that kind of give that desktop experience feel to our users. So things like that provide that look and feel, right? The way something looks from a start screen, access to certain applications, perfect for that. One other thing we use it for is some of the local security policy settings. For example, audit policy. So there are things that, that tool fits well for certain things. The Puppet's our scalpel, right? It's a single-purpose tool with config management, and it does it well. It's precise, great feedback. Our primary goal with that is really leverage the native resource types when possible, right? For example, user. Use that resource if you can for your manifest, and if not, then you can kind of extend into things like the DSC resources to give you that extra functionality. Additionally, there's plugins and providers that can help us. For example, PowerShell and Chocolatey for Windows package management.
Yeah. So now that we knew we wanted to use Puppet, we had to figure out how to start using it. And one of the first things we did was replace our custom Walmart DSC with Puppet. And because of the way DSC works and the DSC module, we were able to do this within 2 months. And that's from start to finish, completely replaced it, and used Puppet to actually remove Walmart DSC, which is nice. We didn't have to go in, uninstall it, wait, and install the other. So we started with all of our new builds. We put it on the SCCM image, lays it down, Puppet comes in and configures everything we need. So with that, we've built over 7,000 servers using Puppet. And most people don't even know that Puppet is on their box. We'll have teams come to us and say, hey, we'd like to use some configuration management tool, but we don't know what's out there. Can we use Puppet? And we're like, yeah, what server do you have? And they'll tell us, and we're like, it's already been there. And it's nice and bad at the same time, because in infrastructure, we're only doing good if nobody knows that we're there. Because if you break, then everybody knows you. But when you're successful, you're running so smoothly that people forget about you. So it's an outreach problem as well as a technology problem. And so once we were successful with our greenfield, we decided we were going to start going everywhere, except for 2003, because you shouldn't. And then we went to 30,000 servers. We started with that. We just put the agent on. We learned a lot of lessons from our Linux team of just get the agent out there, then start doing something small, do another little thing, start with local users, file permissions, then next thing you know, an issue pops up and it's like, hey, I need to fix this scheduled task everywhere, and you're already there. It's hard to actually say, oh, first let me roll out my agent, and then I can fix your issue. So if you actually get Puppet out there, you're already 3/4 of the way to fixing everyone's issues. So some of the big wins we had were the shared learnings. We were able to learn not only from the Linux team, but we were able to contribute back because we were new to Puppet. So we were able to learn roles and profiles and then work with them on what we learned of the good, the bad in our environment.
Yeah, and from a compliance standpoint, Puppet being declarative and self-documenting, it's easy to work with an auditor and say, hey, this is what it looks like, rather than going back and having to manually update some 40-page doc the way you might have used to do things. One example would be, I know natural disasters do happen, right? And a lot of times, some of our stores may be in the path of those things, and they may lose power. It's good to know that when they do finally come back up, that machine would check in with the Puppet Master and get its config and be compliant. So that was another bonus,
Yeah, and the increased visibility has really helped us. A few weeks ago, we actually had an issue where we manage the proxy registry settings. And we started noticing that the changes in Puppet console were going up every night. We were having 4,000 to 5,000 servers change their proxy settings on every run. And so this isn't what we wanted. So we started investigating, and Puppet was able to show us what servers were changing every time. And then we used that to actually jump on and see what application was breaking those settings. That application didn't even know that they were managing those settings, and they didn't even know how they were managing it. So now we've took the burden of our stuff changing and pushed it back on the people that were actually impacting the users. And so that was a big win for us.
Yep. And making a change on 30,000 servers at one time can be a little scary. We had groups that were asking, they're clamoring for us to move faster and move this change faster. And now they would like us to kind of pump the brakes a little bit, kind of manage that change a little bit better. One of the good things about this is we're able to do this at a great scale across different environments, leveraging a lot of the same classification, the same processes that the Linux guys do. If you want more information on this, our colleague Marty Jackson is going to be giving a talk tomorrow on how we do the classification of nodes and how we manage change promotion through different environments. So if you get a chance, go ahead and check that one out.
Yeah. The other thing that it helps with is partnering. So for us, we had a lot of silos. We had a different Windows team for every business unit. And as we started to bring everything into Puppet, we realized we were doing a lot of things over and over. Each team was doing it separately, and instead Puppet could do it and allow them to focus on the actual unique business cases they needed to. It's better for the business in that regard.
Yep.
So it wasn't all smooth. There were a few gotchas, and we figured we'd share what we ran into. And if anybody's done Linux and Windows, you've ran into plugin sync. And so one of the major things we ran into is the standard DSC resources is huge. So since we do custom DSC resources, we remove a lot of that. And we're able to take away things like DSC Exchange, DSC SharePoint, things that we don't manage with Puppet. And this will be helpful for you because then if you deploy DSC, you won't have Linux admins running to your desk asking, why are you putting DSC on my computer? What are these 4,000 files? And then we also had an issue early on where if we wrote an external fact in PowerShell, it was running on our Linux nodes. This also led to Linux admins running to our desk. And Glenn Sardi actually has a great blog post on writing facts for Puppet, and that's what I send to all of my customers who ask, how do I use facts? Glenn told us. I don't have to write that documentation, it's already out there.
Yeah, so looking back on a lot of things we've done and our successes, a lot of this came from really having robust documentation, shared documentation with the Linux guys. So we were able to kind of work with them and work with our Windows guys, put that Windows slant on it, or this slant on it, and improve it overall, right? So documentation was a big key. A lot of times, Windows admins, not all of them are familiar with command line stuff, but we find that Git is hard for most cases, and Puppet's easy. Providing that documentation kind of gets people on the way and gets them more bought into the processes. From an automation standpoint, we looked at some of the things that we're spending a lot of time on that really weren't adding much value. You want to automate those things. For us, an example would have been encrypting strings with higher YAML. We were having to manage a whole other environment and then point our Windows admins to it to try to show them how to do that. Today, the team got together, well, not today, but we got the team together, and they've developed that in the front end and made it easier for any user to go and encrypt their strings. And I got to say kudos to Mukesh and Natish and Ashu.
Yeah, and so that collaboration is key because not only did that help us on our Windows side, but it helped the Linux guys because they were also spending a lot of time trying to show people how to do high-read YAML, and now all we have to do is send people to a web page. The other thing is that community, and with that, we have a Help Puppet Slack channel. And at first, it was just for our team to help other people, like, hey, you've got a question, here's how we do it. But a lot of the users at Walmart have actually stepped up and joined the channel and actually support each other. So they'll ask questions, and then somebody from the admin team or a DBA will ask, and we have Linux admins working with Windows admins to write Puppet code. And so it's kind of crazy and kind of weird, but it works.
Yeah, I mean, we're all here at PuppetConf, and it's still going fine back home, you know? I mean,
Yeah. And so the other big thing for us has been measurement, because it's all great to say, this is what we've done, but if you can actually prove this is what we've done, this is how successful we've been, then it gives you more ammo to go forward and keep doing those awesome things. So for us, by saying, hey, we've managed this with Puppet, all your settings are the same, show me how you're doing that in another tool, I'll switch to that, but Puppet is working great for this.
so what's next? We're not nearly finished, right? I mean, we've got our plans to go ahead and get all the Windows servers under Puppet management, including everything we've got in the brownfield. We're trying to work and collaborate with our teams on the pieces that they manage, kind of walk them through the workflow and the process, so pretty soon they'll be deploying code and managing it themselves. We're looking at Server 2016. We've built baseline profile, and we'll layer on top of that to be able to accommodate some of the settings that are specific there. One other thing we really are looking at is trying to make that process easy for our users to write and deploy their own DSC resources.
Yeah, and harkening back to measurement, we're trying to learn more PQL, because a lot of our users would come and say, hey, how can I do reports on what servers I have out there, what they're doing, et cetera? And we would tell them, well, go to the console. And that's a very manual process. And so a lot of these people want to use like daily reports to see, am I clear, do I need to take action? And so with PQL, we can actually do that with cron jobs and other stuff where they can feed it into things like that. One of our teammates actually created a Grafana dashboard where all of our facts that we really care about trending, he put on there. And we have even a chocolatey version, our agent versions, and PowerShell versions, so that we know what will work out there and what doesn't. And it's helped us find things like we had chocolatey versions that we didn't even know we were using, and we were able to go and correct that. We're also looking to onboard, now that we have the server working, onboard more of the infrastructure apps. We're actually piloting SQL Server right now, going from imaging the box, putting in a special fact, and then SQL Server installing everything. And that's in piloting in production right now, and our next goal is to onboard Citrix, hopefully by the end of the year.
Yeah. Anecdote about that SQL Server thing. Really, I got a Slack message yesterday from some of the DBAs that were a little surprised to see that when they got the server from the server team, it already had SQL installed and configured. So it was a good thing, but I think they were a little surprised.
Yeah.
It's fun.
So, next slide. What are the key takeaways from this? What really helped us in our journey was making sure that it's a community effort. Puppet isn't something you can do alone. It's not something you want to do alone. You don't want to have to write all the configurations for everyone. And once you start bringing on the Windows guys and they realize how this can help them, then they'll get excited and start writing their own stuff, and it's amazing. The next thing is make sure to use the visibility and tracking provided by Puppet, because this helps show how successful you are and prove your story. This allows you to do the agility, because if you can prove I can go fast, then people don't have reasons to tell you not to.
Yeah. And it also frees up, your teams to really focus on the things that matter to them. A lot of our teams are broken into different business units. So by freeing up and doing a lot of this other stuff, we're able to really focus on what matters to their business services, what services they can provide.
Yeah.
So at that point, I think we ran through that a little quicker than I thought, but we'll open the floor up for questions. We have a mic. Yep. Thanks, Melissa.
All right, so I'm actually a Linux engineer, and we're looking to roll out Puppet to Windows for the Windows team. How did you start the conversation with the Linux guys? So how did you open up the conversation, or did they, or how did that conversation start. Does that make sense?
I didn't really hear that.
How did you start the conversation with the Linux team?
We sat next to him.
Yeah.
Forced him, yeah.
Marty told a story about, going on a lunch, Thai Tuesdays at the van, and, we like Thai, we were like, hey, could we come? But
Yeah, we'd like to have Puppet too, because we were tired of managing that stuff. So it's just asking, hey, can we join?
yeah, it really, timing played a lot into that piece, and, those guys were very open-minded, and it worked out pretty well for all of us.
So I apologize in advance. I have 2 questions.
Okay.
How did you overcome the barrier to Git? Because that does seem to be a struggle. And do you guys run separate control repos for Windows versus Linux?
So on the Git part, that's still a struggle. And that's one reason that the shared documentation and the shared workflow actually helps. We don't have 2 workflows, one for Windows, one for Puppet. It's all one piece of documentation. So if a Windows person has issues, we can just go update that. A lot of our end users are on different platforms, like DBAs may do Linux and Windows, but they're still working from like a Windows machine, so a lot of that still
and there's
applies.
really nothing that says a Linux guy that knows Git can't teach a Windows guy how to do it.
Yeah. And then the other question of, we use R10K and we do have separate repos, but it's more of, like our server baseline is just Windows only, and then the Linux guys have their own. And actually, Marty will probably talk about a lot of that in his, because it is with our classification structure. So his session will be good because it shows how we can actually combine those without breaking each other.
Good.
Oh, no, I had a microphone. How did you guys overcome the point and click culture? Like, what steps did you take and what challenges did you have when trying to do that?
So that's one of those that it really helps that Microsoft has started to push a lot of that too. And so when you can point to stuff like Jeffrey Snover tweeting about like DSC being the way forward, or like how they're working towards like PowerShell core and that cloud is the way forward, and there's no GUIs in cloud. I mean, there's the web front end, but it's not really the same. So it's a lot of just, it helps to have those external factors, and then when you show people that you can do all of this through code, it makes it nice. Like when you can change all of these, like say security comes and says, hey, we're now using a different setting, we need you to change that. Before, that would have been a month-long process. And we were able to work with different teammates and actually have them do the changes, and it was done within 2 days. And so showing them that power of, it's really simple, and you can do things super quick that were killing you before for no good reason, then that starts to, it's something you have to chip away at, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Hey, sorry. Just in general, I'm curious how much, because there's so much you can do with Puppet that we, in the old days or in shops without Puppet, did with group policy. And we're about to roll Puppet out for Windows, and I'm curious, in your situation, how much overlap was there? How much group policy has been replaced? What kind of role does it still play? Is it kind of shared between the two? What does that look like for y'all?
Yeah, so that's a great question. There is a lot of overlap there, so you've got to really pick a technology to manage these things. Like the thing about us using Puppet is we actually get the feedback and the visibility. We know for sure things are set the way we expect them. So that's the way we're leaning. And I mentioned earlier we're looking at 2016, and we're looking at that for all Puppet config rather than group policy.
Yeah,
Now, there are limits though, right? I mean, especially with user settings, we just know that we'll have to do those with GPOs. But those are a subset of our systems.
Okay. And then I think he was next, and then.
So I saw that you talked about integrating with your Linux admins. So operations and operations integrating together. How have you been able to? Because we have that pretty well with our DBAs and our different admins and stuff. but we're having an issue getting our dev side of things to onboard with this. How have you been able to work through that and kind of bring that together?
Yeah, I mean, I think right now we're focused on infrastructure apps. And, you know, I think once we get a handle on that, we'll start really branching out with dev side. We'll have to just see how that plays out.
Devs are continually, because you then get a new dev, and so, especially with our scale, we have a lot of different development groups. So it's more of just getting the base layer settled. We haven't gotten to that level yet.
And maybe the stuff we've heard about today will help us too, you know?
Hi, we have an existing production offering of Puppet on the Linux side, and we're just now building out for Windows 2016 in particular as part of that project. So all our new nodes are running with Puppet and quite well. But something you said, and I saw that was, I guess, what you guys did initially. You just focused on the new nodes. But then you talked about putting the agent on your existing nodes. And I just wondered, because everything that we built with Puppet so far has been very new node-centric. So I'm just wondering how you managed to.
So we were actually able to, we have the baseline, and in that we just say if it's a certain OS version, do these modules. And so by using the Puppet code itself, we can limit it to greenfield, brownfield, and
Yeah, on the brownfield, it's you know, manage what we can and then expand on it. I mean, we know there's typically a problem we're trying to solve there. So we'll tackle that problem and then get some more into it.
For your module writing and also for testing of infrastructure, have you gone the RSpec, test kitchen, server spec route yet, or it started to adopt things like that in the Windows world? It's one of the things where in the Linux world, it's just kind of a natural thing.
Yeah.
Especially when you're doing the infrastructure as code. But in the Windows world, it's suddenly now you're kind of delving more into Ruby and writing code like that. But when you start to have that infrastructure as code approach, it's just a progression of software testing in a sense. Have you had any issues with that, or what type of tools do you use?
we are using RSpec, and we're laughing because Mitch is really pushing that from our team. And so he's trying to get us onboarded with Windows to do the testing and stuff also. It is something that we've had trouble trying to onboard, is testing on Windows is you turn it on, it booted, you must be good. So
Hey,
actually
hello,
doing
Kittell,
this like
that's good.
code testing has been a struggle.
Yeah, I mean, we're starting small there, but we want to, improve that testing process, but it's on our roadmap to work on that this next quarter.
I don't know if you covered it, but what is your strategy for managing changes from server owners? You mentioned you have about 35,000 nodes.
Changes from what?
Their own configurations for how they manage their services.
So do you mean like SCCM competing, or like if an application goes in and changes their own stuff?
Well, mostly a server owner telling you that they have, maybe they own 2,000 of those nodes and they want to configure their application across those. Your strategy for managing their changes on top of your changes.
Yeah. I think Marty's talk will help a lot with that, because his is about how we do all of our classification structure and how do we bring in the different teams and separate them from each other so they don't go yell at each other because you broke my stuff, you broke mine. Yeah, it's been a struggle, but it's something that we've done a lot of trial by fire with. So he'd be a good guy to talk to, and his session would be good to go to.
Y'all mentioned compliance on one of your slides. How far have you gone down the rabbit hole, like system hardening, according to external guidelines, things like that, PCI DSS?
Yeah. So as far as like a DSysTig type thing goes, we haven't really tackled that beast yet. We are working towards getting things more managed in a PCI environment with Puppet today. So I think that's kind of our first step, is to be able to do that in those environments.
The nice thing with the being as code is there's some different things you can do. And one of the things we did recently was a little hacky, but it saved us a lot of time. There were several GPO settings that they wanted us to do. And so we downloaded the spreadsheet from Microsoft where this GPO setting matches this registry key, and we were able to do some programming in Excel to then metaprogram that into Puppet. And so something that would have been very tedious to do by hand, we were able to quickly do and create our manifest from that. There's also, like, if you have GPO settings already that you already know, you have like a baseline server, PowerShell has actually released a GPO to DSC converter. And so it would be simple to take that and turn it into Puppet code.
Yeah. And a lot of the reports we're getting now kind of, especially with 2016, you know, we're scanning those to work with our security guys to see how they want things configured. So we've worked quite a bit with that, and now that list is kind of growing as far as configure all the things, basically.
Any other questions? All right, I'm coming.
Quick question on SCCM. We have the same issue where we have SCCM, we also have Puppet. The only issue we have is 2 different teams that run it, so it's a little bit of a contention of who should do what. How did you guys, I guess, figure that out, and or anything that you would say really work well one way or really don't work well?
Right. Yeah, so like I said, it's different use cases, different tools. SCCM is what we would need to have to get software to those remote sites. So we work with those guys and we go ahead and try to cache that stuff ahead of time. In the future, we try to do more with, you know, faster package management type things. Rob?
Yeah. Another thing is, if you look at the release notes for things like SCCM, almost all of them recently have been towards mobile, and they're adding more and more mobile stuff. And for us, what we wanted was something to manage servers well.
Yep.
And especially being so large, having something trying to do everything, you then just build it up, and if it breaks, it's just a domino effect. So having SCCM do what it was good at for us, which is the imaging, and then we hand that off to Puppet, and now Puppet is our thing that we do for Linux and Windows, like configuration management. We don't have to install a console on every application developer's or SCCM user's desktop, and it is little things like that that helped us.
Yep.
Yeah, what tools are you using with Git? Are you using, what's your code editor? I know most of the Windows guys are probably not using VI. And,
Yeah.
using things like Jira.
We both prefer VS Code right now.
VS Code, Git Bash, like.
Yeah. There's a lot of guys that
system.
still use Atom. I mean, it's kind of pick your tool, but code's pretty good.
So you mentioned Chocolatey as some of your, do you have teams that build, or do you cache some of the external repositories into something like Artifactory?
That's us.
So you're building your own, so what type of tool sets are you using? I've done stuff with InnoSetup before.
Yeah.
You know, because it's nice and lightweight.
You want to talk about some of the automation around that?
Yeah, so we started out with and we have a blog post about that, and we can send it to you later if you want, but we wrote a script so that for a lot of the packages are simple. So we would just come and say, give us your silent install, give us your MSI, and do that. And that ended up being useful, but then also people would go and edit the script or to get around it. So we then created basically like a configuration CI/CD task to where you pass in that information to Pisaki, and it goes through a bunch of pester tests and then builds it and then deploys it. So they don't even know like the API keys. They can't go into our where we have all the repository stuff. And we have like a web front end for that.
So speaking of the PDK or of Visual Studio Code, have you tried out the PDK and the new integration with Visual Studio Code that James released the other day?
Yeah, we like it a lot, except that it shows all my errors, so it's kind of sad.
Lots of questions, I like it.
How are you guys documenting and sharing the things that you're controlling on the Windows server so that you can share that with your SCCM team and things like that? I mean, well, I'm looking at the dashboard and the resources that we cover, and there's 1,000 of them in there, and they don't really make much sense unless you're in the weeds.
Yeah, so particularly with compliance management, we don't use that for servers within SCCM. It's, you know, Puppet's our configuration management tool for that.
Yeah.
piece.
So what we've been doing to like show what we're doing, it's actually been more with the server guys and having them actually like try and write their own code. And so for them, for that, the documentation is the code itself. And we put that into right now like a params file. Like it's a very basic baseline, and then the params has all the actual settings. So you can go in and see this is what my values are set to without having to look at each one and just using descriptive variable names. Might be better ways we can do it, but for us, that's been the easiest way to do it so far. Yeah, so we also have been doing Hyra, and we use it for overrides and stuff, and I think we're gonna try and do Hyra 5 through the... Okay, we're on Hyra 5, so we now have to do Hyra 5, Chris and I, like, to actually get that into our module to be a lot simpler. So having it all compacted in there, and then you can just give that to auditors and say, this is what my settings are, and you don't have to do like a 50-page document of, here's a screenshot, here's a screenshot. It's like, this is what it's gonna apply.